Good morning. I'm Ellen Beattie, lay minister. In August, following the sudden fall of the government in Kabul and the resurgence of Taliban control of Afghanistan, the United States embarked on a mass evacuation of some 75,000 men, women, and children whose safety, freedom, and dignity was at imminent risk. While we in the U.S. were generally inundated with imagery of the desperation, chaos, bravery, and tragedy at the Kabul airport as planes were loaded up and lifted off, far less has been shared about the arrival of these families to our country. As suddenly as Kabul fell, the nonprofit organization I work for, the International Rescue Committee, was asked by the U.S. State Department to help receive these tens of thousands of families by standing up 8 refugee camps on military bases across 6 states. I was immediately and unexpectedly deployed to an Army infantry training facility in rural New Mexico, where I spent the next 5 weeks, from the arrival of the first plane load of the Afghan evacuees until the camp reached its maximum capacity of 10,000 people. I've since spent time on 2 of the other bases, and I still speak daily with colleagues in every one of the camps for the relocated Afghans across the country. One thing that I can tell you about this whole mission, which was officially dubbed Operation Allies Welcome, is that the U.S. hasn't attempted anything like it for over 40 years. It was an unplanned event, and there was no game plan for it. It's been quite a journey, of course, much more so for the refugee families than for me. It's certainly offered the opportunity to reflect on the nature of welcome. What was it like for me? First, it involved allying myself with perfect strangers in order to receive and care for these families. At the Fort Bliss camp, we worked under the joint leadership of the Army, Homeland Security, and the State Department, and through an interagency task force that included the CDC, the FBI, ICE, USCIS, and many more. We worked in close quarters in one large, hot, loud, dusty, improvised tent. None of us was accustomed to working together. While we had a single mission, we lacked a single organizational culture or perspective. And believe me, there were some real differences between us. We had to take huge leaps of faith at a frantic pace to build a team and the trust needed to tackle this urgent mission. It was clear from the outset, though, that we were aligned around the shared goal of offering welcome to the newcomers. That was the tone set right from the start, and it influenced all sorts of decisions. For example, the decision was made that the evacuees were always to be called guests, a decision that was adhered to by everyone, from 4-star generals to cooks to ICE agents, all of us. That small gesture reminded everyone that the guests' comfort was paramount. But comfort was not easy to come by in the desert in August, in a facility that was for 400 troops that was now housing 10,000 guests in large tents with no running water. The motto and pledge to the guests was to make every day better, meaning we want to do better by you, and we're working on it. What does welcome look like? Welcome here meant that every one of the 90-odd incoming flights, nearly all of which landed between midnight and dawn, was met with applause on the tarmac as the families deboarded. Welcome meant that in the hangar, where the weary travelers waited for buses to take them on the next leg of their journey to the camp, Afghan flags flew alongside the stars and stripes. Muslim prayer mats were laid out. Nursing stations were set up. Snacks were served, and soldiers blew up balloons and played with small children. Welcome meant daily reports to our task force on what the guests were asking for, and us brainstorming together on how we could meet those needs. Soldiers went to work building and installing washing stations and clotheslines, Wi-Fi hotspots, and shade structures. Welcome meant adjusting the menu to include halal foods that are religiously acceptable to Muslims, and adding fresh fruit and making hot tea available. Welcome meant creating spaces for women and children and finding the right toys and games for this odd setting. It meant hauling bottled water to wherever people needed it, installing signage in Dari and Pashto languages, and so much more. More than anything, welcome meant listening, a big part of my organization's role. Above all, we heard the concerns for the loved ones left behind. We heard questions like, how can I get my mother out? How can I find my baby I last saw in the Kabul airport? Will they evacuate my husband? We listened to people who were afraid, who themselves were confronted with a mass of strangers, all living in tents with 100 cots, shared by dozens of families of all ethnicities and backgrounds. Welcome meant trying to help those with special needs, like responding to a woman with a severely epileptic 3-year-old son who was seizing multiple times in a day, who asked politely, is there any way we could find a quieter place to stay? Welcome meant trying to provide accurate information about what was going to happen next in the midst of an extremely fluid situation. It also meant watching in awe as families self-organized to get along with life, cutting each other's hair, sharing phones to get on the internet, sharing information they had about the US cities where they might be headed, creating sewing circles, setting up impromptu math classes for children, walking food back to the tents for the elders and nursing mothers. 4 months later, over half the guests have been resettled to US cities, while about 35,000 others are still waiting for that chance. All over the country, communities are welcoming these families, including right here in Atlanta, where 1,800 Afghans will have arrived by mid-February. There are so many ways that you can become involved in welcoming them with your time, talent, and treasure. You can see on the slide a few places where you can get involved. Community efforts are much needed because there's still a long path ahead to get past this trauma to a place of stability again. These few experiences that I have shared not even begin to cover the complexity of this particular welcome. Historic in size, coinciding with a global pandemic, and in the midst of great polarization of the country. Much less have I unveiled the full mix of my own emotions through moments of deep tension, fear, doubt, disbelief, and uncertainty. I frequently ask myself, are we up to this? Is this nation up to this task right now? But whenever I thought there was no solution in sight, or doubted our integrity, or had a lapse of faith, something has always happened to restore it. Whether that was a big policy decision, a small act of kindness, or a moment of understanding between two strangers. This spirit of welcome and this sufficiency of the abundance have prevailed. And I know in my heart these families will find their place here among us. And inevitably, like everyone who was touched by this operation, I am better and wiser and stronger for it. I've worked for almost 25 years in programs dedicated to helping refugees, asylum seekers, and other forcibly displaced people to regain control of their lives and build a future for themselves in places that are strange and new to them. The variety of people I've encountered in this work is incredibly rich. More often than not, they know what is to be treated as strangers in their homeland. They are religious minorities, such as the Baha'i in Iran or Muslims in Russia, Christians in Sudan and Burma, ethnic minorities such as Kurds and Yazidis in Iraq, Tutsi in Rwanda, or human rights activists in places like the Central African Republic, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and so many more. Beyond the humanity that binds us all, I have seen common traits and attitude in the displaced, such as resolve, resilience, faith in the future, and gratitude. Engaging with these newcomers is constantly stimulating, constantly rewarding, and frequently humbling. It offers a steady front row view of the best and the worst of the human condition. But ultimately, it restores your faith in who we can be. Let me close by offering you this blessing from the poet John Donahue as you encounter the strangers in your life. With respect and reverence for that the unknown between us might flower into discovery and lead us beyond the familiar field, blind with weed of weariness and the old walls of habit.